They say your life can pivot in an instant. A phone call, a letter, a death. Mine shifted the moment my Aunt Mary stopped breathing. My name is Michael. I'm 28. And if you'd asked me half a year ago where I saw myself, I might have smirked and said anywhere with less snow and more caffeine. Back then, I was juggling 2 jobs: freelance graphic designer by dawn, warehouse inventory clerk by dusk. I lived in a cramped apartment with thin walls and a fridge that groaned louder than I did after 12-hour shifts. Life wasn't a disaster, just anesthetized. Predictable in that dull, grayscale kind of way. And then Mary died and the color came flooding back, mostly red. She wasn't the sentimental type. She wore sharp heels and sharper opinions, built an interior design empire from the linoleum up, and never once apologized for wanting more. She had no children, no husband, and no patience for mediocrity. A woman with taste, she used to say, martini in hand, asks for forgiveness never, and permission even less. She was the only adult who ever looked at me like I might be something. My parents faded into the background of their own lives. Silent, subdued. Most of their energy went into orbiting my cousin James, the family's golden deity. James the prodigy. James the athlete. James who crashed BMWs and still got called brilliant. He was charisma wrapped in a tux and dipped in privilege, and somehow it worked. Every time he flamed out, someone handed him a parachute. Usually paid for by Mary. So when she passed, they came, relatives and revenants alike, swooping in like carrion birds. No one even tried to mask the greed. They salivated over heirlooms, appraised the drapes, whispered behind hands about the company. And James? He arrived at the wake like it was a campaign stop: designer suit, politician smile, rehearsed nods. She always told me I'd run the business one day, he told anyone within earshot. Guess that day's finally here. I said nothing. Not because I didn't care, I cared too much, but because Mary was a chess player, not a gambler. She didn't promise pawns a kingdom unless she had a checkmate in hand. The will was read 2 days later in a sterile office that smelled faintly of mothballs and old varnish. Mr. Thomas, Mary's longtime attorney, looked like he'd been carved from dust and size. His voice rustled like dry parchment as he named each recipient. My mother received the jewelry. A lakeside cottage went to an old friend whose name I'd never heard. A few paintings were bequeathed to a museum. And the business? Nothing. Not a whisper. James's smile widened, smug and crimson, like blood spilled on linen. He glanced my way, charming, victorious, vile. Guess she knew who was ready, he murmured, just loud enough. My mother laid a hand on my shoulder, her voice syrupy with pity. I'm sure she just forgot. Maybe James will let you help, somehow. I offered a smile so tight it cracked my molars. It's fine. I'm happy for him. But what none of them knew, what only I knew, was that 2 days later I received an envelope hand-delivered to my door. Heavy parchment. Mary's seal. Inside, a letter and a notarized document transferring everything, the entire company, to me. Not a stake. Not a seat at the table. The whole damn table. Her note was brief, but a bit deep. Michael, you have vision. James has teeth. I know which one can build and which one only knows how to chew. The company is yours. But be careful. Let the rats believe the cheese is theirs. I reread that line until the ink blurred. Let the rats believe the cheese is theirs. So I did. I kept my silence. I let James grandstand, throw parties in Mary's name, swagger through the office like he was born in its marble halls. He brought in college buddies with marketing degrees and no instincts, redecorated her office with furniture he couldn't spell, let alone design. He was so busy playing king that he never noticed the crown missing from his head. Last week, I saw him leaning against a matte black sports car outside Mary's building, the kind of car you lease for a month and brag about for a year. It was overcast, but he still wore sunglasses, probably hoping they'd make his delusion look cool. He didn't wait for a greeting. You should start packing, he said, casual as death. This office? It's mine now. Gotta clear out the dead weight. I watched him. His hands were manicured. His cufflinks glinted. But his voice had a tremble under the swagger, like he knew, deep down, that something was off. I let my face go blank. Sure, I said softly. Just be there Monday. He laughed. That cocky, hollow laugh he always used when he thought he'd won. I walked away. Not because I was done, but because he didn't yet know. I own the battleground he thinks he's about to conquer. Don't worry, James said, with that razor-thin smile of his. I'll put in a good word for you with HR. Maybe you can answer phones or something. I didn't bite. Just nodded once, like I was too tired to argue or too dim to know I'd lost. Then I turned and walked away, every step deliberate, measured. Inside, though, I was humming like a live wire. The ink had dried days ago. Thomas and I had already smoothed the transition with the board. Mary's most trusted employees, the ones who'd built the company with her from dust and color, had quietly pledged their support. The rebranding was underway. I had a 6-month roadmap, a launch calendar, strategy decks, a team. We were rebuilding something sharper, cleaner, something Mary would have admired. But I said nothing. Because rats don't stop chewing when it's dark. They stop when the trap snaps shut. Monday came in like thunder. I arrived early, dressed in the best suit I owned. Crisp charcoal wool. Understated tie. Hair combed back, heart pacing like a runner at the blocks. I walked into Mary's office, my office now, and sat at her old desk, the same one she used to perch on during design sessions, legs swinging as she sketched whole rooms into existence on napkins. The sun was still low, casting long amber lines through the blinds. Thomas was waiting in the next room. 2 security guards stood quietly near the door, not imposing, but present. Just in case. I wasn't expecting a meltdown, but James's ego had a taste for drama. At exactly 9 a.m., the building shuddered with the slam of the front doors. James entered like a man walking onto a stage, sunglasses gone, blazer sharp, confidence radiating like static. Flanking him was a man with 2 perfect hair and a smugness that screamed retained counsel. They breezed past reception without a glance. "Let's go," James barked, heading for the hallway like he already owned the floor beneath his feet. I heard the footsteps. Heard the hesitation when they reached the frosted glass. The door opened mid-sentence. "Have them clear out that tacky vase collection now." Then silence. James froze. Color drained from his face like a canvas wiped clean. His lawyer, a beat behind, stepped in and glanced around. His eyes landed on me behind the desk, Mary's portrait directly above my shoulder, the room meticulously arranged, the folders aligned like chess pieces. I folded my hands. "Morning," I said, level as stone. "You're early." James blinked. Once. Twice. His eyes darted from me to the desk, then to the nameplate he thought would carry his initials. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a man who'd arrived at the wrong party in the right suit. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering low. Probably asking who I was. Or more likely, why James looked like a man watching his reflection crack. I said nothing. Let the silence hang like fog. James's hand twitched. "Why are you?" he started, voice brittle, gesturing at the desk like it had betrayed him. "You're not supposed to be here." "I own the company," I said, calm as glass. "Have a seat, James." He laughed, but it cracked in the middle. "You're kidding. This is some stunt. The will didn't mention the business. I was promised it." "There was a separate document," I said, sliding a folder across the desk with 2 fingers. "Filed, witnessed, and notarized before her passing. Aunt Mary left the entire company to me. Not the family. Not the board. Me." The lawyer snatched the folder and began scanning. His expression tightened with every line he read. James didn't move. Just stood there, breath quickening, the easy grin nowhere in sight. "No," he said at last, louder now. This is wrong. It's mine. She said so. She told me. She promised it. She told you what she needed to," I said, still quiet. "To keep you manageable. She never meant for you to run this place. You know that. I'm her nephew." I tilted my head. "So am I." The lawyer cleared his throat. "This appears to be entirely legitimate," he said softly. "Filed in accordance with state law. If these signatures are authentic, and they appear to be, then the company was transferred in full to Mr. Richards prior to your aunt's passing." James's jaw clenched. He looked like he'd bitten into something foul and wasn't sure whether to swallow or spit. "This is theft," he said, stepping forward, voice shaking now. "You manipulated her. She wasn't in her right mind. She loved me." "She didn't trust you," I replied evenly. "There's a difference." His hand balled into a fist. "You don't deserve this." I leaned back, eyes steady on his. "Maybe not," I said. "But I earned it." For a second, the room was silent but charged, like the pause before lightning. James looked around as if expecting someone, anyone, to intervene, to correct the universe's mistake. But no one moved. Outside the window, the city kept moving, unaware that an empire had just quietly changed hands. "She was sharper than you ever bothered to be," I said, my voice low, measured, but this time laced with heat. "So don't insult her memory by pretending she didn't know exactly what she was doing. She gave me this company because I respected it. Because I respected her. You never even asked how it ran. You just assumed you'd sit at the head of the table one day, sipping champagne and giving orders." James's face twisted. "I deserve this." "No," I said, standing slowly. "You expected it. That's not the same." His lawyer reached out again, whispering with increased urgency now, but James wasn't listening. His cheeks were flushed, eyes gleaming with something volatile, a rage, sure, but underneath it, a raw, trembling humiliation. He surged forward, lips parting like he was about to hurl something venomous across the room, but then he saw movement. One of the security guards had stepped forward, silent and still as stone. That was the moment James realized this wasn't theater. It wasn't a performance. There were no cue cards, no secret safeties. He wasn't in control. He wasn't even in the game anymore. His posture faltered, some invisible thread inside him snapping. When he turned back to me, his voice cracked, not angry now, but stunned. You kept this from me," he murmured as if the betrayal had only just reached him. "You let me think." "I wanted you to reveal yourself," I interrupted, voice soft but sharp. "Without Mary shielding you. And you did. Spectacularly." He stood there a moment, deflated. The swagger gone. His fists unclenched. That old fire in him fizzled out like a spark drowning in its own smoke. His lawyer tapped his shoulder gently, murmuring again. This time James listened. They turned toward the exit, slow and heavy-footed. But then he stopped in the doorway. He looked back over his shoulder, just a flicker of the old mask, a glimmer of charm trying to resurrect itself. "Is this it?" he asked quietly. "You're really just going to cut me loose?" I shrugged. "You did that all on your own." And then he was gone. I stood there for a moment, frozen in the quiet that followed, feeling the echo of the confrontation vibrating in my chest. When I finally sat back down, my pulse was thudding like distant drums. The hum of phones outside drifted back in, along with the faint tick of Mary's vintage wall clock, the one she insisted on keeping when digital models were all the rage. I let my gaze wander around the office. Photos in silver frames. Stacks of worn sketchbooks. Color swatches pinned beside antique lamps. The controlled chaos of someone who had shaped beauty for a living. For the first time since the funeral, it felt like she hadn't left at all. Like she was somewhere in the walls. Watching. Let the rats think the cheese is theirs. I glanced at her portrait again. She was half smiling, always was in that picture. Sharp eyes. Tilted head. Like she knew this was exactly how it would go. "Thanks, Mary," I whispered. But the story didn't end there. That afternoon, as the city began folding into twilight and I was working through budgets, my phone buzzed on the desk. I almost ignored it. "James?" A message. 7 words. "You think this is over?" "It's not." I stared at the screen. Read it again. A third time. There were no emojis. No laughter. No dripping sarcasm or fake charm. It wasn't performative. It wasn't even trying to provoke. It was a promise. Cold. Precise. Clean. I'd always thought of James as a mosquito, annoying, persistent, but harmless. This felt different. There was no flailing in the message. No tantrum. Just ice. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. Instead, I stood and walked to the wide window floor to ceiling glass corner lot. Mary had loved this view. Said the best ideas came while watching traffic inch by and people scurry through rainstorms like ants with umbrellas. "You learn a lot looking down," she used to say, lips curled around the rim of a coffee mug. "Especially when they all think you're on their level." Outside, the clouds had thickened into pewter bruises. The first drops of rain hit the glass like whispers. The office was settling. The staff had taken the news with surprising grace. I'd held private meetings all week, kept Mary's assistant, Sarah, on full-time godsend that woman, and started integrating a small tech team to bring us out of the analog age. The designers? They respected me. Maybe because I wasn't trying to be Mary. I wasn't chasing spotlight or legacy. I was trying to build something. But now there was James. And James was no longer sulking. He was calculating. I turned away from the window slowly, exhaling as the rain picked up. This wasn't over. And I'd be damned if I let him take what Mary gave me. James had always been spoiled. Entitled to his bones. But not stupid. No, that would have made him easier to dismiss. Beneath the designer shoes and the empty charm was something slick, something that knew how to bend reality just enough to make you doubt your own footing. He didn't destroy things with fire. He whispered them into collapse. That night I called Thomas. Told him about the message. There was a long pause on the line. Then a sigh, heavy with something that sounded like regret. "He's lashing out," Thomas murmured. "Losing the company, that wasn't just about the money for him. That was identity. Illusion. I don't think he'll take it to court. He has no grounds, not a scrap of legal standing. But people like your cousin don't need a case to start a war. Just an audience." I asked him to document the message. Just in case this went beyond words. He agreed. By Friday, the first drops began to fall. An anonymous complaint hit the Better Business Bureau. Vague, shapeless accusations about fraud and deceit, no names, no documentation. Just venom with a disposable email. Then came the blog post. A pseudo-journalistic hit piece on Mary's firm. Accusations of overbilling. Allegations of unethical sourcing. Fabricated interviews with former clients. The site was small, barely trafficked, but it was deliberate. Someone wanted the stink to linger in the corners of search results. Someone wanted the name she built to erode. I had no proof yet, but I didn't need it. James wasn't trying to kill the business. He was trying to contaminate it. Make it toxic by association. Undermine the foundation until I looked like the rot. I stayed composed. Issued a calm, professional response. Submitted corrections to the blog clearly run by amateurs or opportunists. Sent a private newsletter to our core clients reassuring them that everything was aboveboard. Transparent. Stable. But this wasn't about the damage. It was about the signal. He wasn't coming after the company. He was coming after me. On Monday, Sarah entered my office holding a manila envelope with the tips of her fingers like it might detonate. This came through the mailroom, she said. No return address. It's weird. She dropped it on my desk and stepped back. Inside was a thick bundle, pages and pages of printed emails, old social media screenshots, out-of-context DMs. Some were real, though years old, harmless conversations from my freelance days sliced into misleading fragments. Others were outright fabrications. Messages I'd never written. Comments twisted to suggest I'd mocked clients. Stolen ideas. Bragged about overcharging. On top, a single sticky note. This is just the beginning. I leaned back, exhaled slowly. So, not petty. Tactical. James hadn't just thrown a tantrum. He'd done recon. Dug through digital ditches or paid someone to do it for him. Found scraps and shadows to assemble a narrative designed to damage me piece by piece. He didn't want the company back. He wanted to make sure no one trusted me to run it. And if I snapped? If I went public, flailed, screamed? He'd be waiting with a smirk and a microphone. See? Unfit. Unstable. Not like Mary. I wasn't about to hand him that stage. Instead, I made a different call. Jessica. Crisis management. Veteran tactician. One of Mary's oldest allies. I remembered her from my teenage years, always impeccably dressed, always armed with the kind of sharp questions that cut through spin like glass. She picked up on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd call, she said without preamble. James's name's been bubbling up on the nastier corners of the internet. Whisper campaigns. Weaponized forums. I stiffened. What kind of forums? The kind you visit when you want to hurt someone quietly. No fingerprints. Just poison. She agreed to take the case without hesitation. Said she'd track the envelope, dig through metadata, trace the blog's authorship, and run a digital sweep across our brand ecosystem. We'll clean it up, she said, and then added, almost reluctantly, but Michael, if he's willing to go this far, you might need to counter him in a way he won't see coming. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought of Mary. Of the way her voice would flatten whenever she spoke about betrayal. Of how she used to say, enemies with ambition are predictable. Family is feral. They hit where you're soft. She knew this would happen. That's why she kept the transfer secret. That's why she never told James a damn thing. She wasn't just shielding me. She was setting a stage. Because she knew. James wouldn't walk away. He'd burn the house down just to sift through the ashes and call them his own. But if he wanted a fire, fine. I bring one. On Tuesday, I arrived at the office early. No meetings. No social posts. Just a quiet pivot. I called Thomas. Brought in Jessica. And began restructuring the company. Piece by piece, we converted it into a trust-controlled entity sealed under my sole authority. No backdoor claims. No shareholder vulnerabilities. We locked down everything: brand rights, financial access, client data, internal systems. The architecture Mary built now had reinforced steel beams. And James? He didn't even know the locks had changed. I didn't start looking into James out of spite. Not yet. But something in his silence felt loaded. Too controlled. The message, the smear tactics, they weren't born of wounded pride. They reeked of premeditation. Like he wasn't just reacting to loss, he was covering something up. So I started digging. Jessica had access to databases I didn't know existed. Legal filings, business registries, internal networks used by private investigators. She called in 2 cybersecurity freelancers she trusted, quiet operators, efficient. Between them, the mask began to slip. It started small, a trail of bloated invoices and dormant LLCs. Turns out James had tried launching his own interior design consultancy 2 years before Mary passed. He poured tens of thousands into branding, flash decor, and paying friends to pose as satisfied clients online. All surface. No substance. He didn't know how to design a damn thing. Every project on his website was stolen, clipped from Pinterest, or repurposed from Mary's firm. Modified just enough to escape lazy detection. But not enough to fool real clients. Someone noticed. Then another. A small claims suit was filed. The firm folded quietly within 6 months. James disappeared the entire venture, scrubbed it from every profile. The family never knew. He re-emerged months later under a different label, strategic consultant. Sleek title. Empty resume. He lived in waiting, polished, unemployed, LinkedIn primed for the moment Mary would be out of the picture and he could slide into her chair like it had always been his. But it didn't stop there. Jessica traced a payment trail from one of his burner accounts to a boutique PR fixer in another state, the same operation that seeded the smear blog, the fake testimonials, and likely compiled the forged email dossier. James had hired them to manufacture the downfall, plant the scandal, and wait. Once the rot seemed irreversible, he'd swoop in, recast himself as the responsible heir, savior of the legacy. It was strategic, surgical, and I was done playing defense. This wasn't about salvaging the company anymore. It was about making sure James never set foot in this world again. But not loudly. Mary used to say, class is quiet. So I planned something elegant. A week later, I hosted an intimate rooftop brunch, soft lighting, fresh florals, no press releases, no live streams. We called it the Vision Forward Gathering. Just legacy clients, key staff, a few industry names Mary once trusted with her best work. It wasn't an event. It was a reset. A whisper of the future. The morning unfolded gently, light music, handwritten menus, laughter carried on rooftop breezes. And just before we wrapped, I stepped up to the ivy-draped platform, a remote in one hand and Mary's watch on my wrist. Before we go, I said, voice even, I'd like to take a moment to honor Mary's legacy by being transparent with the people who mattered to her most. This company is transitioning, but what it stands for remains unchanged. I clicked the remote. Slides lit up the whitewashed brick wall behind me. Clear, concise, staff promotions, mentorship programs, community-based workshops. A new sustainability initiative pulled straight from Mary's old sketchbook margins. These weren't just updates. They were promises. Proof that the soul of the company wasn't being sold, only refined. There was soft applause. Genuine. Brief. Then came the final slide. Titled in crisp, neutral text, What We Stand Against. The hush was instant. The screen shifted, redacted screenshots, forensic breakdowns, timelines. The smear blog. The forged communications. The PR payments traced through shell accounts. And at the center, the fraudulent design firm, run by James under a pseudonym, sued and blacklisted by multiple industry platforms. I didn't name him. I didn't need to. The story told itself. Glances passed between guests like static. One designer raised a brow. A former client exhaled like she'd suspected it all along. No gasps. No outrage. Just quiet understanding. And that was more powerful than any scandal. I stepped forward, met the crowd's gaze, and said, you may hear noise in the coming weeks. Rumors. Accusations. I won't be responding to most of it not because there's truth but because I refuse to dignify desperation with attention. This company is moving forward. We're building something deliberate, sustainable, and clean. And what we're building will not include those who tried to poison it from the inside. Silence followed. Not cold. Not uncertain. Just respectful. Gravely still. No one applauded. Not yet. And I didn't need them to. Because silence, when held in the right room, speaks louder than any ovation. And then Jessica, silent all morning, seated near the ivy-draped wall with a flute of Prosecco untouched, stood and raised her glass. To Michael, she said. Her voice was calm, clear, and cutting through the quiet like silk. For doing it right. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was real. Loud. Earned. Later that night, the office was empty again. I let myself in with my own key, flicked on just enough light to guide my steps. The hum of the air conditioning pulsed softly through the vents, and Mary's old chair creaked as I leaned back into it, facing the city's glittering skyline. Below, traffic murmured. The world moved on. But I sat still. A year ago, I was barely holding my life together, chasing freelance gigs, checking my bank account before buying groceries. And now, I was sitting in a tower Mary built from nothing, protecting it from rot, wearing a familiar face. I could have ended it there. I'd won. The company was secure. James was disgraced, gutted by his own ambition, brought down without even being named. A silent, surgical strike. But that wasn't enough. Because James wasn't just reckless. He was dangerous. And he wasn't finished unless I made sure of it. So I made one final call to Thomas. I want to proceed with legal action, I said. Defamation. Harassment. Fraudulent activity. Use everything we've compiled. There was a long pause. Papers shuffled faintly on the other end of the line. Are you sure? He asked quietly. He's already lost everything. He's not going to stop, I replied. Not until someone makes him. We filed. The case wasn't just strong, it was unshakable. Jessica had built the backbone, payment trails, metadata, fake domain registrations. The PR firm was connected, the forged emails traced, the intention made plain. James's whole strategy laid bare, manipulative, malicious, and calculated. He was served within 3 weeks. His denial was immediate. Then desperate. He blamed his lawyer. Claimed it was all a misunderstanding. That he'd been misled, misinformed, misunderstood. The judge didn't flinch. James was ordered to pay damages, issue a public retraction on the same blog he'd used to smear me, and was legally barred from contacting anyone at the company directly or through a proxy. No more whispered rumors. No more veiled threats. Just silence. The kind that comes when a mask finally slips and nothing is left behind it. The final touch? Mary's headquarters, our building, had one small and used office on the first floor. A quiet, forgotten space. James once pointed to it during a family brunch and said, "That'll be mine someday." After the lawsuit, I converted it. The walls were painted soft cream. Shelves lined with sample books and old design tomes. A long table where young creatives could spread out their ideas without being told to keep quiet or stay in line. We called it the Mary Room. Every week, students came, most from places where creativity wasn't seen as a career. They sketched, touched textiles, spoke like their voices mattered. And when they asked why we did it, I never gave a speech. I just smiled and said, because not everyone gets a fair start. But everyone deserves a real chance. James never returned. Not really. Though once, about a month later, Sarah told me she saw him outside. Just standing at the front entrance, eyes on the name etched in the glass, Mary Design Group. He didn't come in. Didn't ask for anything. Just stood there for a while, looking up at the building he thought would someday belong to him. Then he walked away. And I didn't feel sorry. He'd been handed everything. Again and again. And each time he'd burned it down trying to prove he was above the ashes. Me? I just stayed steady. Quiet. Did the work. Waited for the storm to pass. Because Mary was right. Class is quiet. But revenge? Revenge, when done right, that's just good.